All right, we're going to get started here. So first off, I want to thank everyone for coming. I'm glad that everyone was able to make it out and run with Crowie. My name is AJ Johnson. I'm an education specialist here at TrainingPeaks. And on behalf of myself and everyone here at TrainingPeaks, we're real glad to be hosting Craig. And we really appreciate your time. So tonight's really pretty simple. We're just going to chat a little bit about training, racing, hopefully give everyone out there tips that they can use in their own training and racing. And that's really the goal here for tonight. So it's going to be pretty informal, and we'll definitely have some questions afterwards. So not that he really needs any introduction, but you probably all know the man they call Crowie. He's a 5-time IRONMAN World Champion, twice 70.3 and 3-time IRONMAN World Champion. Let's see, you've got sub-8 hour Ironman in Melbourne as well. And from 2004 to 2010, 27 straight 70.3 victories. Is that right, as far as you know?
Yeah,
that's a lot.
It sounds good. Let's go with that.
So, okay, we'll just to start things off with this season. So, last year, well, you don't really need to worry about Kona points. You just need to finish one because you've won Kona within 5 years. So that's how that works for you. So, you started off with Melbourne, and that was a pretty solid race for you. And since then, how have things been going?
Yeah, that's been good. I obviously planned the season back in January. As best I could. My wife was pregnant due in March, so I think the thing that I planned was trying to, as you mentioned, validate for Kona early. And the best place I felt to do that was in Melbourne. I'd won the year before, so I think it's always nice to go back as a defending champion. And it's close to home. I don't get the opportunity to race at home that often anymore. So, and since then, yeah, it's been a good season. I've built into it nicely. I've done 3 70.3s, Honu, Kansas and Lake Stevens. And, on the radar now is Las Vegas, the World Championships for 70.3 in 3.5 weeks, and then 5 weeks after that, Hawaii. So it's been a good season thus far, I'm really enjoying my summer training up here in Boulder and looking forward to the next couple of races.
And how many years have you been basing yourself in Boulder for this block?
Well, I've been doing Ironman since '07, but my wife and I have been coming to Boulder since '05, which was the year our first daughter was born. And 3 years prior to that, we spent the summers out in San Diego. So it's been over a decade now of coming to the US. It was always a dream of mine to race here. It's, the sport predominantly follows the Northern Hemisphere summer. So if you're from Australia, you've either got to base yourself in the US or Europe. We did a couple of seasons in Europe, and since then we've been coming over here and really enjoyed it. So it's '05 was our first summer up here, and been coming back ever since.
Okay. So what's keeping you coming back to Boulder? Is it just the altitude, or is it a combination of multiple things?
Oh, it's a lot of things. I think I'm what they call a responder to altitude. So
right.
Training up here really benefits my fitness, particularly when I go back to sea level. But I think more importantly, we just wanted to find a town that was good to live in. Obviously, I'm out training a lot, but I have a wife and 3 children, so they have to live here. We've got a lot of friends here now. Very close to Denver, international airport, you can fly direct to anywhere. So I checked a lot of boxes, and the training's phenomenal. You've got the mountains to the west, rolling farmland to the east, so you've got a nice variety. I think the altitude, 5,500 feet is perfect for long distance training, even Olympic distance non-drafting training. I think it builds a strength that possibly you can't get at sea level. You're at an altitude where you can do a fair bit of intensity, but if you want to go up high, you can go up to 9,000 or 10,000 feet, even higher. So there's that variety of training. It's a lot of reasons, and a lot of great athletes based here, so a lot of great people to train with.
Is that another aspect that you enjoy, that you're not like that one guy in spandex in the whole town?
I think this town's used to spandex. So
yeah, pretty much.
It's good. It's good. I think there's a good culture here. It's a cool town in that way. You've got the university. There's the academic crowd, and then you've got the endurance athletes, and it's a nice mix. It's a really good vibe, a good feeling, and as I say, we've enjoyed living here. It's been fun.
So you mentioned obviously you've got Vegas coming up and then Kona. So in terms of like a phase or a cycle, where would you say you are for that?
Well, I'm right in the teeth of it. It's this is work time.
Yeah.
So I typically do 2 really big phases in a season, and one's early season or has been recently, with an early season Ironman to do, so January, February, and then another one in August. So, you know, getting my teeth into some good miles right now, and a lot of intensity as well. So, you know, it's a hard time of year, but I've found as I've gotten older, it's harder and easier. You know, I think with experience you learn how to look after your body a bit better, and you learn how to train a bit smarter. But obviously, as you get older, the body doesn't recover like it used to, so it's a double-edged sword. But no, this year things seem to be going really well. Not as busy as I was last year. Less, I guess, what I would call distractions to training, and the trainings just seem to come very naturally and easily this year. A lot of good consistency, a lot of great sessions. So yeah, enjoying it.
So I think for a lot of age group athletes, they, you know, leading up to maybe an A Ironman race, they're going to do a 70.3 prior to. So for yourself, obviously, you've got a break in there. How do you go about that phase where you're not enough to really recover and start a whole new cycle of training, but obviously Kona's the big A race for you?
Yeah, well, yes and no. I mean, I feel my best distance is the half Ironman distance. So
Okay.
I'm not using Vegas as a tune-up. For me, it's as important. And it's a distance, I think, it's more in my wheelhouse as an athlete. I guess I'm more naturally predisposed to do well at that distance. I think Hawaii is the one that the media and everybody else looks at, and it's an important race. But you know, I don't really use races as stepping stones for other races. Every race is an important race to me. I don't race for training. If I want to train, I train. When I race to put out the best performance I can. That being said, as you mentioned, you know, you go through different periods and phases throughout a season where, you know, you can't be in your 100% best shape all year round. So it's important to plan ahead. And you know, most of the guys I race are in the same boat. It was interesting because when we were in Melbourne, everyone was saying, oh, it's only March, but it's March for everybody. Everybody's in the same boat. Right. So everybody's obviously looking at October, but still racing to try and win. So it's always a level playing field in that regard. But yeah, you know, I think it's an individual thing. What you learn with training is there's the textbook and then there's experience. Yeah. And you know, the best coaches out there will tell you that a good program's a combination of all those things. I think you need a sound basis in, you know, the principles of training, but also I think the best coaches are good communicators and get to know their athletes well. And you know, different athletes respond to different things. Some athletes like volume, others respond better to intensity. Obviously, every athlete has a different amount of time to train depending on what their situation is, family, job, and all of that. So, you know, I actually preferred when Vegas was 4 weeks out from Kona, to answer your question. I just felt that was you know, I think it's interesting. WTC moved it further because they thought it would encourage people to do both, but I actually think it kind of discourages because, it's, as you mentioned, it's a funny distance in the middle. There's 5 weeks. You've got to recover from one. There's really not enough time to go into another block, but you've got to do something because it's 5 weeks later. So in 2011, when I won both, I found it was very easy to, you know, to do all the lead-up work for both of them early, and then just fine-tune for Vegas, do that one, recover from it, and then a little bit of polish for the longer one. Add a few different things for 2 or 3 weeks there, and but most of the work, you know, the foundation was laid early. So it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge holding peak fitness for 5 weeks, as any athlete will tell you. Obviously, the races are different, and I think it's a little easier when the races are more about strength and speed, which I think both of those ones are. So, you know, not all half Ironmans are as strength-based as Vegas is. It's a very hilly bike and a hilly run, a lot of wind and heat. Typically,
much like Kona. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think, you know, a lot of the things that you implement in training for one works for both, which is why they're such a good fit, I think.
Now, you were talking earlier about having to work with experience, but also coaches. And so for a lot of athletes, there's a lot of trial and error.
Yeah.
And that can be really, really frustrating. So for yourself, how long did it take you in that process before you really started to find things that you felt really worked for you? And then also the counter side of that is how much are you still tweaking your own training?
I think it can take years because, you know, the nature of training is you don't try something and then abandon it after a week.
Right.
You need to absorb the work and see if your body gets the adaptation and see how it all plays out. So it can take a long time. You know, I was fortunate. I was a late starter into the sport, but I was studying to be a physiotherapist. So, you know, I learned a lot of anatomy and physiology, and I knew the principles of endurance training and how to prescribe and apply the training. But yeah, you quickly learn that you just have a sweet spot for some sessions. Some style of sessions seem to work better. You seem to get a better adaptation from those. But it can take years to bring the whole thing together. And as far as, am I still tweaking? Always. I mean, I think that's the nature of training as well. You know, you do certain things and you get the improvement, and then you sort of plateau out. It sort of has run its course, and you need to change the stimulus, either progress the training somehow with intensity or volume, or maybe more rest. So I'm always tweaking things. I like to try and add a couple of things each year for the enjoyment factor as much as anything else. I mean, the majority of the program stays the same, but yeah, I certainly add different sessions. I'm not scared to try new things, so long as I think I have the basics covered in the program, you know, making sure I have the endurance and the stamina and the strength and also the speed overlaid on top of that. You know, so long as I check all those boxes, I think, you know, there's more than one way to train.
Right.
If you had Dave Scott here and Mark and Welshie and Lessing and Paula, they all had great results and were great athletes. I'm sure their training wasn't identical. So I think that's the key to training, finding a way to train that best suits you.
So within that then, how frustrating is it for you to maybe, or have you ever had a situation where you've said, that just didn't work? And are you looking at maybe like, you now have a race that you've just not really thrown away, but you're really disappointed and you say, wow, this didn't work and I feel like I've just thrown away 3 months of training? Or what do you gain from those then?
I think you can always gain something. There's always a positive. So long as you train consistently, there's always something. I mean, even if you don't reach your benchmarks or goals in this particular race, moving forward, that training will still be there in some shape or form. So, yeah, I mean, I used to overtrain. As I said, I was a late starter into the sport, and most of the guys who were my age or a little older, a little younger, had come through the junior ranks. So I felt I had a lot of catching up to do. So I used to train very hard to try and catch up, but it doesn't work like that. It takes time. Endurance sport takes time. You can't just get 5 years worth of base in 1 year. And I used to train very hard right up until the death, and I'd be overtrained for a lot of races. And I know certainly my wife and a few other people used to think I had, you know, I used to train at a good level, and then I'd sort of underperform in races. But I just always had a mindset, until I was ready or at a physical level to win, there's no point in really tapering. I'll start tapering when I'm good enough to produce a performance that I think I'm capable of. I knew I was still on the steep part of my improvement. And that being said, looking back, it probably was a silly mentality, because if you're going to race, why not maximise that opportunity, freshen up and get the most out of it. I had a long-term plan though. I didn't, you know, I was realistic. When I came into the sport, you know, particularly in Australia, there was Greg Welsh, Miles Stewart and Brad Bevan. They were the big three. And I wasn't on their level. I wasn't close to their level. Then there was a second tier below them, and I was the tier below that. I didn't want to taper to finish 12th. I wanted to keep training and taper at a point where I felt I could compete to win. So, you know, I felt, yeah, I could freshen up and maybe get 8th. I guess from that standpoint, and yeah, it's underperforming if you're capable of getting 8th and you get 15th. But as I said, I had a long-term plan. I wasn't even interested in 8th. I had my sights set a little higher than that, and I had a long-term plan. I was realistic enough to know that at that point in my development, I wasn't going to compete with guys who'd been at a world-class level for a decade or more, guys who had multiple world titles. I was too young, too inexperienced, and just flat out I wasn't good enough at the time, and I needed to train, and I had a long-term view to get to that level.
All right. So we're going to actually get a little bit of a sneak peek into some of Crowie's training. He's been nice enough to let us look at three of his power files from the bike. So we're going to take a quick look at those, and they're pretty impressive. So the first one we're going to look at is the Wiggins ride, which, yeah, I don't know if a lot of you know the town of Wiggins. It's about 80 miles east of here.
It's worth visiting. There's a lot out there.
Yeah, I sense a little bit of sarcasm in there. So this is what that file looks like. So this is, like I said, it's 80 miles out, 80 miles back. The amazing thing is, if you look over here, you're looking at the kilojoules. So that's 4,717 calories expended on that ride, which was just over 7 hours. So that's a fairly long, steady day. Now, you did that with a few other people, or was that solo?
No, there were 4 of us. It was myself, Marinda, Carfrey, Tim O'Donnell, and Chris Lee. Okay.
And are you guys sharing the workload on that? Because obviously everybody kind of wants to get their own workout in? No one wants to just
No,
draft?
we spread out. On the way out, we rode our own sort of 20 metres apart.
Okay.
And it's slightly downhill on the way up, but we had a headwind. So
Yeah, you can kind of see.
yeah.
I mean, that looks a little bit more aggressive than it really is. It's kind of a flatter ride than that really looks like. But
So it's sort of
still 160 miles.
it was the longest ride I'd ever done, and not longest in terms of duration, but certainly longest in terms of distance. But it was different.
158.4 miles.
Yeah.
Where you got there.
So typically, I do 1 or 2 rides that long in a build-up for an Ironman.
Yep.
I think it's important just to be out there burning fuel for that amount, teaching your body to use fuel, helps with the nutrition aspect. And, you know, they say over distance or over time. I mean, the race is 8 hours plus. So, you know, I think that for me, the thing with training is you can't do an Ironman to prepare for an Ironman, but there's certainly, you try and simulate different aspects, and it's a long day, so I have a couple of really long training days. Typically, if I'd ridden that long, it'd have been up in the mountains, so your average speed is a bit lower and you don't cover as much ground. So this year we thought we'd head east just to sort of simulate the race more, down on the aero bars a little more. So I guess get the body prepared in that aspect, a lot of time down on the bars, you know, toughening up the lower back, strengthening the lower back. And yeah, I like to do things in a specific fashion. You know, I mean, like I say, you can't do an Ironman to train for an Ironman, but there's certainly different aspects you can incorporate into your training that very closely simulate what happens on race day. And I think for me, I try and do that as often as possible. And yeah, so we did that ride last Wednesday.
Yeah, and you mentioned the mountain ride, so that's the next one we're going to look at. So he does that on Wednesday. That's 158 miles. Then that's Saturday. You head out, and again, you're looking at 135 miles. Now this one, if you're familiar with Trail Ridge Road, this is out and over Trail Ridge Road. Trail Ridge Road is the highest continuous paved road in North America. So you're reaching over 12,000 feet.
No, I don't think we went to Trail Ridge. It was this last Saturday. We went up to about 10,000, I think.
Okay, let's see. We'll show it on the graph here.
I don't even know. Maybe.
When you go so hard, you can't remember where you were.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So we'll pull it up on the map here.
If this is last Saturday's ride, I'm pretty sure we went up to Estes Park.
Oh yeah, okay, that is Estes. I'm sorry. Yep.
And then up to the peak to peak.
Peak to peak.
We were up.
So you only reached 9,000 feet. So.
Yeah. So we're up there for about three. I like to do that ride because you're exposed to higher altitude for 3 or 4 hours in the ride. And the ride was meant to be about 110 miles, but you know, the way these things turn out, I'm coaching an athlete and she had motor paced in the morning, and we'd organised it, and I'd paid the guy to turn up, and you know, he said, well, you've still got an hour left. So I just organised to meet him at the end, and that wasn't planned, but then I did an hour behind the scooter after that ride. So,
wow.
Which was good, and it's something I've done in training, not often. Once again, I do it once or twice in a build-up, but I did it. You know, my preparation for Melbourne this year wasn't as long as last year. So it's something I did a lot more of, you know, more intensity in the long ride. And not to play catch-up, because I don't think you can do that in a sense, but, you know, it was a way of trying to jumpstart my fitness and get up to race level and race fitness. So, yeah, I had a mate back home in Australia, I'd ride usually 3 or 4 hours and then jump behind the scooter for an hour. And I think that's a good simulated session of an Ironman, because I think, you know, anyone who's done an Ironman knows you tend to fatigue the last 35 miles. So it's not so much about going fast behind the scooter, but more turning the legs over a bit quicker, that sort of neuromuscular adaptation. As you fatigue, the tendency, I think, is always to get into a bigger and bigger gear and start grinding the gears, whereas to be efficient and sustain power, you know, it helps to pedal with your normal cadence. And the scooter, that wasn't the plan on Saturday, but it ended up being a great session though. So
what kind of benefit do you get from this session versus riding Wiggins, which is flying? You're still covering, obviously, over the Ironman distance, but how are they different for you?
Well, they're different. Wiggins was, I think we averaged 23 miles an hour for the 7 hours, so it was more just a longer, sort of a grind out day, closer to threshold, down on the bars. That ride on Saturday was fairly low intensity until the last hour.
Okay.
So it was just time in the saddle, building endurance, exposing myself to altitude, higher altitude than here for for 3 or 4 hours. A little bit of climbing, which adds to the strength. I like to throw that into a lot of the long rides as well. So
Do you tend to stay seated on climbs?
yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I mean, I get out and stretch the back, but for the longer climbs, like climbing up to Estes here, I try to stay in the seat. And yes, that's just a different stimulus. You know, they were both long rides, and typically I wouldn't do 2 rides that long so close together.
Is that a tweak that you've decided to make,
Well,
or is it just happenstance?
When I had the opportunity to get the guy, I mean, motor pacing, one of the challenges is finding someone to ride the scooter,
Yeah.
and I had the opportunity to do it on Saturday. So,
Somebody qualified, because that can go really wrong really quickly.
no, absolutely. And this guy had an hour available, so I thought you know, I didn't see it as a huge risk or a gamble. I've done the session a few times before. As I say, it was the ride was 35 miles longer than it was meant to be, but you know, I was experienced enough to know just to fuel up and keep the nutrition coming and make sure that the intensity behind the scooter wasn't too hard that last hour. So
That's where the experience pays off.
I think so. I mean, you're not trying to set world records every time you go out. It's not about each session. It's how they all go together in the week and how they all go together in a build-up over 2 months, 3 months. So you know, you do have sessions where you feel great and you might hit benchmarks. Most of the time, particularly when you're in Ironman training, you're tired and you're really just trying to, get the work done in a consistent manner. And certainly within the week, you do have sessions where there are parameters that you're looking at and, you've got to, I guess, coordinate the week such that when those sessions come around, mentally and physically, you're able to hit those benchmarks. So.
Okay. So we actually take a quick look here. So this section here is, let's see, zoom in here. So that's Big Thompson climb. So looking at that, you're looking at about 2 hours of climbing, and your cadence is a little, it's 78. So, a lot of people are looking like 80 to 90. Is that something you're focusing on? You're talking about developing power earlier.
Well, we've done the Wiggins ride on the Wednesday, and the cadence had been higher.
Yep.
So this was, I wanted the cadence to be, I mean, I think, not wanting to get too scientific, but you have different muscle fibers, and, I try to work all of them. Some, the fast twitch ones operate better at a higher cadence, but, it's something I try and do, even within the race in Hawaii, I sort of swing the cadence a little bit in the race in different sections when you know the course. Because, you don't want to fatigue. I think you can prolong the fatigue setting in by mixing up the cadence a little bit. Okay. It's something I incorporate into a lot of my sessions, actually, just moving the cadence around. Not a lot, but 5 or 10 RPM. And certainly going up a climb is the time to drop the cadence a little bit because, you have the terrain there to help you generate the extra power going up the hill and the resistance. So.
Sure. So the last session we're going to look at is one that he did yesterday, and this is kind of one of those, I don't want to say like top secret sort of sessions, but this is a high level workout that really, it's something that the pro athletes, you see a lot of pro cyclists doing this. It may not be so applicable to a lot of age groupers, but the concepts behind it and what he's working on certainly are. So Craig came into the TrainingPeaks Pain Cave, and we're at 5,000 feet. So I don't know if you know this, but you lose your top end, you lose about 1% per 1,000 feet. So you're 5% lower for your threshold. So it's difficult at altitude to work on that. So, of course, the thing to do is to just add oxygen. So we have an oxygen generator in the back there. We put a mask on him, and he does these very difficult threshold intervals. So they basically allow him to act like he's at sea level. So it's a very short but very effective workout for you. How many times have you done this workout, and why have you decided to continue doing it?
I've done it, I think, 4 times in total. And once again, it's just one of those things I like to add something each year, just to change the stimulus. I think your body gets very used to the same sort of training, and maybe you don't get the adaptation or the improvement that you hope if you just keep doing the same thing over and over. So what I found last year was towards the end of the summer, I'd been up here probably 3.5 months, and looking back through my TrainingPeaks file, I hadn't done any sessions similar to an intensity that I do when I'm home in Sydney. And coming into Vegas, I felt I needed some because anyone who's raced out there, it's a hard course. There's a lot of climbs. Obviously, it's great competition. It's the World Championships, and I just felt I was very strong, but I was lacking a bit of top end speed, which can happen when you're at altitude. So it was something I looked at last year, and I did, I think, two or three sessions last year. And I found that I got a good bump in fitness with each one.
Right.
So I don't think it's the kind of thing you need to go out and do a lot of.
You wouldn't want to do a lot of it either,
Yeah.
because it's the least fun form of cycling I think I've ever seen anybody do.
They're hard
You're
sessions.
just on the trainer,
Yeah.
it just looks
Yeah.
awful.
Yeah, they're hard sessions. They're very hard sessions, but they serve a purpose. I mean, I was able to sustain an intensity throughout those work intervals that I couldn't without the oxygen.
Right.
And yes, I think it will give my threshold a little bit of a bump. And it's just, once again, science aside, it's a session I experimented with last year, and I found it helped. It gave me an extra. It enabled me to, I think, improve my top end, but also coming back to threshold when I was doing sustained efforts, time trialing, I felt I was able to maintain that level a lot more comfortably.
Okay.
So I think it certainly nudged my threshold up, and so we tried it yesterday, and it was, I won't say it was fun, but I'm glad it's done.
So, I mean, and this kind of is basically a pyramid. So he basically did a minute and a half and then rest, and then 2 minute, 2.5, 3 minutes. So what kind of effort level is this for you? Are you, because you're kind of paying attention to watts, but you're also, I mean, you're still some residual fatigue from the two big rides, obviously.
No, absolutely.
So you're hitting some good wattages, but what, I mean, just percentage-wise, what would you say? Is it 100% or?
Well, typically, a sports scientist would tell you when you do a VO2 max session, you have to be fresh because it's max.
Yep.
And obviously, I'm in heavy training, so I'm not fresh. And it's not your typical textbook VO2 max. I wouldn't even call it that kind of a session, because you can see the power gets higher towards the end, which is what I always try and do.
Right.
So I'd say I was at 95% for the first couple, and then closer to 100 for the last two efforts. So I didn't want, once again, I guess in a textbook VO2 max session, if you do it right and go to max, there should be a little drop off. Maybe if you time it right, the last interval, you potentially should drop off a little bit, because you've hit your limitation, and that's the whole point. So I wasn't quite there. You can see the last effort was the best one, or close to it. So
yep, 364. Yep.
I always try and do that. I always try and once again, with experience, I know to get the most out of it, though, you have to go hard. So I go hard in the beginning, and hopefully, there's always an element of risk too, because as I said, I'm in hard training. So I was hoping that I'd have a little left in the tank for the last couple of efforts, and I wouldn't have a drop off, and I'd be able to bring it home, add 1 or 2%, and that's the way it worked out. So it worked out. I'd class that as a successful session. So.
And you'd done this workout 2 weeks before without the intervals, but without the oxygen, correct?
Yep.
And you saw roughly 5% improvement.
I think there's about 15 watts, 20 watts, yes, absolutely. So I only did half the session. I think I went up to the 3 minutes, or up to 3 and then down to 2. I didn't come down the way I did yesterday with the complete pyramid, but I think at the highest I was 15 or 20 watts high, which is what you want to see with the oxygen, and that's the whole point. You're able to tap into a level that you haven't tapped into since you've been at sea level. So once again, I considered it a successful session for that reason. That's the highest power I'd seen all summer.
So in addition to obviously swimming, bike, and running, there's a lot of other things that are going to be a successful Ironman athlete. So you've been known as one of the toughest mentally. So can you talk a little bit about that, as far as, is that something that has naturally come to you? How not only just in races, but just the day in, day out grind of things?
Yeah, it's never been hard for me. That's what I enjoy. I enjoy the challenge of it. I like doing the work. And everybody sees, I guess, the race and the magazines and whatnot, but I like the day-to-day grind in the months leading up to it. And it was a simple commitment. I just wanted to be the best athlete I could be. That's it. And I think part of that is working very hard, and also working smart. Greg Welsh, he's a great athlete. He's an inspiration of mine. He was the first Australian, first non-American ever to win in Hawaii, actually. I was lucky enough to train with him early in my career, and he said to me, "Boy, you've got some talent, but you need to work." And those words ring in my ears all the time. I came away from, it was a training camp in 1997. I was still a full-time university student, and he was a 4-time world champion. And those words impacted me. I thought it'd be a shame to underperform because you got outworked or you were lazy. And you know, not everybody can have the genetics that I guess a world champion has, or maybe the advice or the opportunity, but what you can do is work hard and work smart. And I always felt that was the minimum buy-in. You know, that's the least I can do. And particularly later in my career, you know, I think earlier in your career you're self-motivated for, I wouldn't say for selfish reasons, but to validate what you're doing. You know, I had a university degree, I had other things I could have been doing, and you know, it was a struggle the first few years as a pro, and you know, I worked hard to validate the decision of pursuing the profession that I had. And you know, if you're lucky enough to win and win often, I think it swings and roundabouts a little bit. It becomes more about the people who have helped you. So I work hard now for them to honour the sacrifices that they've all made, and there's been plenty of them. Obviously, it starts with your family. As everyone here knows, you don't, you know, get to the start line of any race without help on the home front. And fortunately, a lot of good friends and advisors along the way, and great sponsors. And you know, I feel that's my job, is to get in great shape, and it's easy for me to do it. I got to work hard, but you know, hard work is easy work. I always say I enjoy it. So it's never been challenging for me. I mean, you go through different phases where your motivation is, you know, not always at its highest level, but you got to get out the door. I mean, I always find the hardest part of any session is starting. Once you start it, you can get your teeth into it, and you know, once again, with experience, you learn too that, you know, you have a program written out, but for whatever reason, you know, you've trained hard. Your body's not absorbing the work and recovering the way it should. You've had late nights with the kids or with work. Sometimes you have to be flexible within that plan. You need to have a plan, but you need to be flexible within the plan, and know that if, you know, every session should have a purpose, and if you're clearly not going to get the purpose of that session out, then maybe you need to alter it. You know, so that comes with experience as well, I think. And the honest truth is, I just love it. It's easy to get out and train. I really enjoy training. I love the sport now probably as much as I ever have, and it's still challenging. It's not about winning, it's about performing to a level I think I'm capable of. That's what it's always been about. So I just love to get out and train. It's easy to work hard when you enjoy what you do.
Sure. You're talking about flexibility and kind of having to change things on the fly. So your wife, you had your third child on the Tuesday before Ironman Melbourne,
yeah,
which is probably less than
yeah,
exactly what you planned for. So how, you're talking about having to you know, work with family, and that's obviously a major part of life. How are you dealing with that when obviously it's close to something that big?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we knew roughly when the baby was going to arrive, more or less. You can't exactly plan those things, but and we definitely knew the date of the race. And you know, I thought last December that there was no. I wanted to go back because, like I say, it's, you know, you travel. I mean, I've spent the last decade 90% of the time racing away from home. You get an opportunity to race a regional championship at home. I love that race for a lot of reasons. And I'd won it the year before, the inaugural running. So I wanted to go back and defend, but family's first, and I didn't even bring it up because the due date was 3 days before the race. The baby's due date was 3 days before the race, but Neri was the one who brought it up and said, we might be able to make this work. And I was like, okay. I'm listening. And once again, I mean, it's all about balance. We have a great support network at home. Neri's the reason that I'm still racing. I mean, she's the reason I've had all the success I've had. She's the reason that I've been able to do what I've been able to do and enjoy doing it. I wouldn't have liked to come and spend 6 months a year, obviously being from Australia, in another country, but we made a commitment, even in the early days when we didn't have a lot of money, that we'd always travel together, and then with the family, we'd keep the family together. So, she's the sounding board, and I said to the organiser, they approached me and said, do you want to come back? And I said, well, this is the situation. My wife's due that week. And I'd said to them and they were super understanding. And I just said, if the baby hasn't come by the Tuesday of race week, I won't be. So there was
right in the deadline there.
There was a deadline.
It's perfect timing, right?
So of course the baby came on the Sunday. I thought I won't be racing. There's no way. And I sort of I think that was the hardest thing, because physically I was ready. I felt I was ready. I'd done a lot of work up until probably the last month. And, you know, obviously with a heavily pregnant wife and 2 other children, I felt a responsibility to be at home a lot as well. But once again, it's just all about planning. I probably did the preparation earlier than I would have otherwise, but I got all the work in that I felt I needed to get in. It wasn't the same preparation as I'd done the year before, but, you know, things change all the time. I think you need to adapt. I was very happy at the amount of work I'd put in. But I guess the hardest thing was mentally, because on the Sunday it looked like baby was going to take her sweet time. So I sent a message to the organisers saying, looks like I probably won't be coming. And then right at the 11th hour, she turned up, little Arnie, and you know, I didn't want to leave. When the baby came at 3 o'clock on the Tuesday morning, and
so you got no sleep.
well, I didn't. I don't want to act as if it was hard. My wife did all the work. She got no sleep. But anyone who's been through that knows, I think the emotional uplift outweighs anything else. The thing was, I just didn't want to leave. I didn't want to go down to Melbourne and race. I wasn't thinking about the race. I didn't want to race. You know, my wife had Neri had gone into labour at 11 o'clock on the Monday night, and we got our neighbour to come in to look after the other 2, and I got home at 6 in the morning just as the other 2 were waking up. And you know, our eldest Lucy, she's pretty sharp. She saw Mum wasn't there. She knew exactly what had happened. So we all went back to the hospital, and I just didn't want to leave. You know, and Neri said, "Have you booked your flight to Melbourne yet?" And I hadn't. So I kind of floated the idea I mightn't do it, and I got a shoe in the backside, so I went home and booked the flight, and it worked out well. I had a really good race, and mentally I was in a good place. I was very happy. And the truth is, I just got beaten by 2 better guys on the day. 2 guys who, you know, one guy, Marino, who'd come off a bad performance in Kona, and he was out for redemption. He was super fit,
yeah. And
Nico Lanos the same. And I think we've seen. I mean, I remember 12 months previous when I'd won Melbourne and Nico finished 4th. And I'm good friends, good mates with Nico, and we were in the drug testing, and he was disappointed. He'd had a leg injury, he couldn't prepare the right way, and as you mentioned, that's alluded to before, it's very frustrating, and he battled it all year. I remember seeing him. I saw him in Melbourne, which was March, and then I didn't see him for 6 months until Kona, 2 weeks before the race, and he still hadn't shaken the injury. He hadn't done much running, and so he consequently had a bad race in Kona last year and pulled out of the race. So he and, I think, Marina turned up to a championship race that had a lot of qualification points on offer, in great shape. And, you know, when Nico ran a 2:43 that day, on a point-to-point run, it was a headwind. It was a headwind the whole, 35k of it was headwind. And then crosswind, he ran a 2:43. He deserved to win. So, you know, for my part, I was happy. I got 30, you know, I'm not going to say I was ecstatic, because when you've won a race, unless you win it, it's not quite the same, but you know, I had a new baby at home,
yeah.
And professionally I was satisfied. I'd done what I could. I felt I'd executed a good race, and sometimes in sport you just get beaten by guys who are better on the day, and that's what happens. So I think importantly I'd validated for Kona as well, and then that opened up the season. And you know, the main thing is we had to organise Lani's passport and visa, and then we could start planning some races. So.
Wow. So taking you back to Kona 2011, probably, I'm going to assume, one of your favorite days.
It was a good day, yeah.
Yeah. So if you don't know, that was his latest title, and set the Ironman course record as well. But the big thing, I think, is that you also had a massive PR on the bike there by all over 14 minutes. So you don't see that often with pro athletes. What would you attribute that to? I mean, is it a matter of just the training? Because sometimes that just happens during the day, especially with the pro athletes. It's very tactical. If things go your way, how do you put on 15 minutes or almost 14 minutes on the...
It's a combination of things. It's a good question, because you don't often see, you know, when you train for a long time, as anyone here knows, you plateau out at a certain point, and you're looking for little gains. Right. And it was a combination of things. You know, I always felt I was a good bike rider. I mean, anyone who knows the sport well knows that you don't jump off and run well if the bike's taxed you.
Yep.
And I had a blueprint in Kona where I'd swim in the first 5 or 10 people, mark who I thought were the contenders on the bikes, the likes of, your Andy Raylerts and those kind of guys, and then unleash a marathon that I hoped would be good enough to win. And my first 3 years there, it had netted me a second and 2 wins. So,
but oddly enough, you had those 2 wins, and yet there were still some people I don't understand why. It's like you weren't winning the right way. Like,
well, people are ignorant, and I mean, I don't know. Honestly, it never bothered me because ultimately in sport, they say it's a bottom line business, wins and losses. When you win, and that once again, don't get me wrong, just because you win, I didn't feel like the performances were perfect. When you win, all it means is you've beaten everybody else on the day. It certainly doesn't mean you've performed as good as you could have or should have. It just means you've beaten everybody else. And my goal is to improve, win or lose. But I found it hilarious that I was getting criticised, and I was winning. I wouldn't say it's never comfortable, but I was dictating.
Yeah.
It was the race was going the way I thought it would.
Seemed like the riders were doing what they had to do because they knew you would potentially outrun them.
But they couldn't get away from me. I mean, even the year in my second win in 2009, everyone made a big deal. McCormack and all these people made a big deal out of the fact that I got off the bike 12 minutes behind Leoto. So did they. I was right with them. Leoto was 12 minutes up the road, but I was with Rasmus Henning and Andy Raylert and all those guys. I was with the contenders. Yeah. So, and then obviously fast forward to 2010, and a lot of those guys, got together and decided to formulate it. And you alluded to the tactical side of it, and
and they planned almost all year for that race. Like, this is what we have to do.
And I guess I didn't feel it was within the spirit of the sport. It's an individual race, but if it's within the rules, I guess you can do what you have to do. So
But 2011 is a different story.
Well, it was a different story, and a good friend said to me after 2010, and I felt I'd had a great race in 2010 to withstand all those tactics on the bike, and then to still run a 241 on tireder legs than I'd had there in the past. I think it showed the level of fitness I had going into that race, and I guess the mentality of the other guys was, we'd rather anyone win but him again. So, and that's racing. I didn't take it personally, but actually I did. That's a lie. I did for about a month. I did take it personally, and but a good friend said this has given you the opportunity to do what you've always wanted to do, which is ride hard, and not be tactical. So I think to answer your question and not be too convoluted, there was a little bit of a change in training, but it was more a change in mindset. I wasn't just going to sit in and wait. I was going to go. That was my plan. When Leoto and those guys went, I was going with them. And that's exactly what happened. I got away on the bike with Marino and Leoto and Luke McKenzie, and the 4 of us just rode away. As simple as that. And we had a 7 or 8 minute lead. And I think at about 95 miles, Chris dropped, and Chris is a phenomenal bike rider. He dropped the other 3 of us, and I was super comfortable. I contemplated going with him, but I thought, I've got 6 or 7 minutes on the so-called runners. I'm quite comfortable here, so I'll stay here. And I think Chris got off the bike with a 2-minute 40 lead that year. But it was also a change in equipment, and that shouldn't be understated. That helped. Aerodynamics over 112 miles. It's no secret. The faster you go, aerodynamics becomes exponentially more important. And if you look at my history, the first 4 years I went to Kona, I raced in a road helmet. My equipment probably wasn't what it could have been. I just felt that my training would trump everything. I wouldn't say it was an arrogance, but it was always been my mindset. The cornerstone of success is hard work. I'm not going to rely on fancy bikes and helmets, and but then when you take a beating, you do look at everything, and you look at those extra 1%ers, and aerodynamics in a good bike is more than 1%. So I think it was a combination of different equipment, slightly different training, not too different, but just a different mentality. I was, like you said, in 07, 08 and 09, I was happy just to mark the opposition and then try and win it on the run. In 2011, I thought, I'm having a crack on the bike, and we'll see what happens. And I think when you've won a couple of titles, you can take a couple of risks like that. And I weighed up. I didn't think it was a huge risk. I thought I was well prepared, and I ended up running a 244 that year still, and Ran out of salt a little bit at the end, cramped up, but it was a good day.
I think a lot of those guys behind you were hoping that maybe this year wouldn't be the year that you were able to run a 240, 245-ish, but still having those legs and going for almost just over 14 minutes faster is pretty impressive.
It was a good day. It was a good day. It's one of the days that you dream about having. I felt in control until the last 3 or 4 miles in the run. I was totally in control. I felt I had another gear. I had a 6 or 7 minute lead, and that's probably why I got a little complacent with the nutrition. There's another lesson. See, no day's ever perfect, and I ended up having to walk a little bit and stretch, and I'd run out of salt, and I probably wasn't as vigilant with my nutrition as I should have been, and it made it an uncomfortable last couple of miles. But I was able to get to the finish line and get the record by 12 seconds.
All right, so we're going to start taking some questions from everyone. So we've got a mic that we can pass around, but I'm actually going to start things off. We've got a few questions from the folks on Twitter. So Peter Hawtrey typed in, and he asked, basically, what did you train with before you had your power meter? Was it just heart rate, RPE?
It was RPE.
Really?
It was RPE.
When perceived exertion, basically, today felt hard.
Yeah, pretty much. And when I was starting out, I was a uni student, didn't have a lot of money for all the gadgets, and I'm glad, because it taught me to listen to my body and listen to the feedback. And I'd often get on the trainer and do efforts, or on the track running, and you learn about threshold, what heart rate, what it feels like to run fast for 3 minutes and then rest for a couple and then repeat 7 or 8 times. And sometimes you overstep the mark and go too quick, and then the last few repeats really fall off, and you learn to really listen to those cues, how you breathe, your breathing pattern, how your legs feel. And in 2007, though, I got a power meter on, and I really felt it helped. I think the main thing, coming from a short course background and half Ironmans, was just with the pacing. And it helped me prescribe the sessions a bit better and be more time effective with obviously, when you step up in distance, it's a bigger time commitment, and you want to be effective with the time that you are spending out there in the saddle. But running, I still do it to just rate of perceived exertion. So,
all right. Any questions out? Yeah, right there, right in the middle. What's your name again?
Alyssa.
Yeah. Grab the microphone.
What do you eat race day morning?
Oh, it's a good one.
I take all liquids on race day. So race day morning, I've been using a drink for an Ironman race day. I drink this drink called Ensure Plus. It's high calorie content, and then have a cup of coffee, and then that's it. And then I normally have I have 2 of those Ensure Plus drinks, 2.5 or 2 hours before, and then if I start getting hungry, I'll sip a gel half an hour before, and I'm sipping a weak electrolyte drink the whole time as well. So I've always just done it. I read in a magazine, I think it was Dave or Mark or one of them did that, so that's what I started doing as well, and it seemed to work. I tried it in training though. I tried it in training, and I never do anything different on race day that I haven't tried. So usually my big brick session, I'll knock down a couple of those Ensure Plus drinks and a cup of coffee, and I think it's prudent to try new nutrition in training. That's what I always did, but that's what I have. And then on the bike, I get all my calories in liquid form, so no gels for me during the race.
All right, we're going to do another question from Twitter. So Robert Schultz was asking, how often and what type of weight routine do you do?
Like all training, it changes depending on what time of year it is. So, because once again, the stimulus, your body gets used to it, and it runs its course, and then you plateau out. So I think you have to change things up. So at this time of year, I'm doing a lot of core strength and stability, a lot of one-legged stuff that simulates cycling and running. So it's just strengthening all the muscles that attach to the pelvis. And a lot of it's not strengthening too, it's activating. It's teaching them to turn on. It's a lot of deep muscles, your deep abdominals, and those contractions are they're not explosive like a quadricep, they're more long-lasting, low-level contractions, and it's almost a neuromuscular trigger. You want to turn them on. So I do a lot of stuff on the Swiss ball, a lot of one-legged stuff, elastic bands, and I also lift. Dave Scott has been the guy who's coordinated my strength and conditioning program ever since I stepped up in distance to Ironman, and a lot of exercises that translate well into cycling and running. So we do some squats. What else? It's an hour-long routine. I should be able to remember it. At this time of year, what I can say is there's a lot of faster movement. So, you know, January, February, it's more lifting to get strength, heavier weights. Now it's faster movement. So not a lot of heavy weight, but like box jumps, a lot of split leg lunges, bounding, some plyo stuff, hopping. And, you know, stuff that, and Dave's, he's been a very good sounding board because, I mean, I think he was the last guy finished on the podium when he was 40.
Yeah.
In 94, he finished second. And so I guess we have a similar, I mean, I'm 40, so not wanting to gloat about it or anything, but...
Fittest 40-year-old on the planet, right?
Who knows? But I think Dave would give me a run. But, you know, I think what typically declines as you get older is your speed and your strength. Your endurance gets better. So that's been reflected in my weight training, working a lot on the strength. I didn't do weights 5 years ago. I didn't need to. I always did my strength training specifically hill repeats on the bike or on the you know, overgeared work on the bike trainer. But I felt, you know, I certainly noticed from mid-30s on my strength decline. So the weights have helped me a lot. And Dave coordinates the program, really. He does all the thinking. And it's periodised, heavier stuff earlier in the year. Now it's a lot of stability, fine-tuning, faster movements. So like any program, it's just not a cookie-cutter thing that's the same 12 months of the year. It changes to reflect what training I'm doing, what racing I've got coming up, and I'm not lifting too heavy right now because I'm obviously training. Like, I mean, imagine you did a leg weight session or a heavy lifting and then tried to knock out that harder workout. You know, your legs would be fatigued and flat. So it's reflective of the fact I'm doing a lot of race-specific work and higher intensity right now.
Okay. Anyone else in the audience? A question? Yep. Get you the microphone.
Hey Crowie, I'm racing Vegas in a few weeks as well. What advice can you give me for racing in that kind of heat? Because I seem to struggle in the heat a little bit.
Don't go to the strip until after the race. That's the first. You know, you got to, short of training in it, obviously you hear people talk about acclimation, that there's certain things you can do, different protocols you can do to stimulate the changes in your body, the training in the heat. So I would Google that. So there's a lot, too much to go through now, but you'll see when you get in some things that you might be able to implement. You know, obviously Vegas is a hot, dry race as opposed to Kona, which is hot and humid. So, you know, I would just say Google about things that you can do to acclimate your body. You know, training here in Boulder, it's a similar climate. Vegas is not quite as high, so the altitude is probably half. I think it's 2,400 feet from memory, so, but it's very dry like it is here. So I think training in Boulder is a good preparation. You know, I certainly know a lot of the pro men and women who are racing in Vegas have based in Boulder this summer for that very reason. So, you know, you've got to look at, in the heat, the things that get depleted, like the salts and the minerals, and you've got to be very vigilant and have a good nutrition plan. And I wouldn't advocate going out and training in the heat of the day every session, but you know, if we get a hot weekend this weekend, you know, there's still some time to fine tune your nutrition. Saturday or Sunday, get out and do some training right in the heat of the day, and yeah, try and tweak that nutrition. It's crucial. Obviously, you've got to be hydrated, but you can't get depleted on salt. And you know, you may have to monitor. You know, in a cooler race, you know, your intensity level might be high. You might have to regulate your pace a little bit because your heart works harder in the heat. So it's harder to get to threshold and you can't stay there as long in the heat. So I think there's a pacing aspect and also a nutrition aspect. But I would also Google some of those things and see if there's anything that you can implement. You can stimulate those sort of changes in 2 weeks. Increase plasma volume and those sorts of things, changing your sweat rate. It might be worth having a read.
Do you change your nutrition plan based on the temperature or heat, or is that something you have to do on the fly sometimes?
You have to do a lot of it on the fly. I mean, even within the how many times have I raced Kona? 6 times, yeah. The nutrition's never been exactly the same. if it's windier, that changes things up a little bit. You tend to get more dehydrated, burn more calories, so you have to up in, and you just have to be vigilant. And as I said, I have a plan, but there's flexibility and there's ranges that you work within, and I learn to listen to my body. The one thing I don't do is overdo it. I think the worst thing you can do is have too many calories and you get that backed up stomach. But I think we all know what it feels like to get low on sugar. And when that happens, your body's receptive, so you've got to get it in quick. And I mean, it pays to always have reserves handy. You don't want to be halfway between aid stations and starting to hunger flat. The goal is to have, like with your pacing, your energy levels steady all day. And one piece of advice I got was little bits often. Don't go cold turkey for 10 minutes and then try and drink half a bottle. Just take little amounts all the time. Help your stomach in terms of the concentration and the volume that's in there. Help it absorb. But it changes all the time. I mean, the first year I did Vegas, I think I went through 2 bottles. Last year, I remember I hardly touched. I think I went through half a bottle. And I don't know why that was, because it was hotter last year than the first year. So I just do it to feel. If I don't feel like eating or needing calories, I know how I feel. I know how I should feel. And on the run, I'll take stuff at every aid station, but often on the bike, particularly in the halves, I mean, one thing that I think the pros get, nice is we get to start early. I mean, in Vegas, you're swimming at 6:30, you're on the bike before 7, and you're off the bike before 9. It's the amateurs who really get the heat of the day and the wind a lot of the time. So, I think last year, I'm pretty sure we were off the bike before 9 o'clock in the morning. It was still hot, but it wasn't Vegas hot. It was only high 80s. It wasn't, triple figures like it was for a lot of the amateurs an hour or two later. So, but as I said, you're always thinking on your feet and listening to your body.
Any more questions from the audience? Yeah, in the back there.
I have a question about training. I registered for Boulder, and it'll only be my second Ironman. Do you recommend getting a coach that covers all 3 disciplines? Do you recommend just having a coach for whatever you struggle with more? And I recognize that I'm asking this in the TrainingPeaks headquarters, but I'm really curious what your thoughts are on that.
I can give you a really good answer on that, but I'll leave it to him.
That's a good question. I think a coach who oversees the whole program is very important, because it's not swimming, cycling and running in isolation. It's how, not only in race day, in training, it's how you want to put the program together so that sessions complement each other and not work against each other, if that makes sense. And an experienced coach will know how to do that. Not just the science, but with experience, knowing some sessions go well back to back and then you need a recovery day or whatever. But pulling the whole weekly program and you might not even be on a weekly cycle, it might be on 10 or 14 days. That being said too, when I started out to improve, I went and swam with swimmers, biked with bike riders and ran with runners. So it was I wanted to not only see the kind of sessions they were doing, I wanted to watch their technique, see what it was that made them so good, why they were so efficient. So I mean, when I work with a few people, one girl I coach now, Lisa, and I've coached myself my whole career. I write the program. But if there's a master swim squad available, I mean, at certain times, when I want to swim, I go and jump in. I'm going to use the expertise of the coaches on deck. And in Boulder, there's a lot of great programs to swim with at different times of the day. And I think you need to utilise that, because there's a lot of people who are just swimmers. There's also a lot of triathletes there as well, but ex-college swimmers, a lot of good swimmers, and the programs are really good. A lot of them are designed for longer distance freestyle. So that's one aspect of the program. I write the times of the week that I like to swim, but then I'll just go and jump in with a master's program. And if you go to the same program, there's usually a continuity there. That, you're not going from one program to the next. Usually within one program, they have a cycle and they build up and recover and whatever. So, but I think it's smart to have one coach to oversee everything. That's the uniqueness of triathlon. It's how the 3 disciplines go together in training and in racing that ultimately will determine the level of success that you have. So, get a coach.
Well, so now that you're coaching a little bit, what's it like to watch one of your athletes race? Are you just as nervous because you're not in control of that, obviously?
Well, I'm only coaching one person as such. I've helped a few different people over the years, had a look at their program, made some suggestions. You know, Lisa hasn't raced as much as we'd like because she's been injured, so maybe I'm not a great coach, I don't know. But
That's from her prior.
well,
training.
it was a long-standing thing, and I, you know, I think you got to accept some accountability because it's been enjoyable. I mean, she is. We're speaking of Lisa Norden. She's the Olympic silver medalist from London last year, reigning ITU World Champion. She's won the race in high V the last 2 years. She is a phenomenal athlete, and I found it's been enlightening because when you coach yourself like I have for so long, you kind of get on autopilot sometimes. But when I ask her to do things, it makes me think about why I'm doing it a little bit more deeply, which I think has helped a lot, and it reinforces sort of my own training beliefs a lot more, and it makes me question them, and Lisa questions me too, and I think, which I like. I really like that. I'm like, okay, why are we doing that? And you know, there's always more than one way to do something, so long as you have a solid argument for why, or whether it be experience or what the science tells you or whatever. So, but it's been enjoyable. She's got a race in Stockholm coming up next weekend, and then her two big races, which are high V again in Las Vegas. And she's been fun to work. She's a total professional, just in every aspect. Not only her training, her recovery, her nutrition, everything. And it's been fun. You know, I've been asked to coach a few people over the years, and I you know, with a younger family, it's a responsibility because you're helping guide their career. And I didn't want to do a job where I felt I wasn't maybe committing the time that they deserve. So, you know, it was one of the things we found with Lisa early in the year. She had a swim coach and a run coach, and she was in Stockholm and I was in Australia. So there were certain challenges there. I wasn't, I guess, overseeing things as closely, but you know, she came to Boulder, and it's been a lot better the last 8 weeks. And certainly that's one of the great things about TrainingPeaks, though, and the age we're in with Skype, and you can coach, you know, from the other side of the globe, and it's so convenient to be able to archive somebody's data, bring it up with a click, discuss things, communicate that way through different time zones. And but yeah, we had to streamline the system a little bit because there were too many cooks in the kitchen early on. So, but I've enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun. I'm really pumped to see her race. I wouldn't say I'm more nervous. I am a little nervous, obviously, because I'll be sitting there watching her on the computer, but I think she's well prepared. I think she's going to do well, and she'll get exactly what she deserves, which is great performance. She's a hard worker, and you know, I think the job of any great coach is to empower athletes to make smart decisions. And you know, you're not dictating. You're I think you're putting you're making suggestions and putting a framework in place, but everything should be up for negotiation. You know, like I say, there's more than one way to do things. And the great coaches who I've seen have been great communicators, get to know their athletes well, and are invested in it as well, emotionally as well. But you know, actually, when the gun goes off, the athlete's out there on their own, and you can impart as much knowledge and experience, but they have to make smart decisions. And I think that starts in training. A lot of that starts in training. And I know when Lisa and I sit down and discuss things, it's a two-way street. I'm not just saying do this or do that. She'll say, what do you think about this? I'll say, well, this is what I think. And she'll say, yeah, okay. Or she'll say, why wouldn't we do this? And we just go back and forth. It's like anything. You know, there's going to be pros and cons to. There's more than one way to do it. And I think you come up with a way that best suits each individual athlete. But it has been a lot of fun so far. Let's hope I've still got a job in a few months.
I think you probably will. Anyone else in the audience? Another question? Grab the mic.
Yeah, here's a question from Twitter. Triathlons is who asked it.
That's a good one.
How long does it take to get used to Boulder's altitude if I'm doing my first Ironman next year in Boulder?
You know, that's a good question. I always find when I come up here, it takes 7 to 10 days. But there's two schools of thought. You either come up the day or 2 days before, or you come up a couple of weeks before. So, and it's a very individual thing. Once again, you know, some people are what they call responders, which means, I guess, typically their hematocrit's low when they get up here and they struggle with the altitude. Then they get a great adaptation. Other people I've trained with come up here and they can go straight up to 8,000 feet and have no problem with it. So I guess the short answer is if you can come out here and do a little triathlon wherever you are, if you can come up and do a little training weekend, you'll know pretty quickly whether the altitude affects you or not. And if it does, I would say come in 2 days before, come in late. But once again, there's so much information out there on the net now, I would research it as well. There's more than 1 or 2 schools of thought on that. And I can only speak, I guess, intelligently on what's worked for me in the past. If I was racing up here, I would definitely, I mean, well, I'd be living here. I do live here, so.
That's a simple solution.
Yeah.
When you first get here, do you do intensity right away, or do you use it?
No, for me personally, I can do a lot of volume. I don't typically do a lot of intensity the first 7 days. And I tend to stay around this altitude. Or I go up to Jamestown. For those who know that Jamestown, that's about 7,000 feet. I don't go much higher than that for 10 days though. So, and I ride on my own, I train on my own a lot, so I'm sort of the master of my pace, my own pace, and I just listen to my body. I mean, I think we all know when we're sort of going above our limits. I would say it's very important the first 2 days. You typically feel good the first 2 days up here, not to go too quick, just to err on the side of caution. And normally the first 7, I always schedule it so I get up here either off the back of a race, so I'm not doing too much intensity anyway, and then I'll do a 7-day block of volume where I'll just go out east a lot or north towards Fort Collins, similar altitude, and I tend not to get the heart rate up. But for me personally, the thing I struggle with the most when I come up here is the swimming, obviously the breathing aspect. Your face is in the water. It's controlled breathing, it's a little harder. But I've seen people come up from sea level who are lowlanders, as they say, have never been altitude, and come up here and they train as if they were at sea level. Everybody's different. So I think if you've signed on to do a race up here, and you get the opportunity, I'd come up and do a little training block up here. Obviously great to do a bit of recon on the course and have a look at the course, but see how you do respond to the altitude as well.
All right, any more questions from the audience? All right, I guess that's going to conclude the session. So definitely want to thank Craig for his time. We really appreciate it, and good luck to you in Vegas and Kona.
Thank you.
And we'll be rooting for you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for coming along, guys. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Okay.